are the self and universe eternal? That's the first question. Second question, are the self and universe transcend? Are the self and universe both eternal and transcend? Are the self and universe neither external nor transcend? 4 questions, right? So then another set of 4 questions is, do the self and universe have a beginning? Do the self and universe have no beginning? Do the self and universe have both beginning and no beginning? Do the self and universe have neither beginning nor no beginning? So there's a second set of 4 questions. And then there's the third set of questions. Do the Buddha, blessed one, do the Buddha exist after death? Does the Buddha not exist after death? Does the Buddha both exist and not exist after death? Does the Buddha neither exist nor not exist after death? And then there's the 2 last questions that was asked to the Buddha. Was, is the mind the same as the body? And the last question, are the mind and body 2 separate entities? And surprisingly, when this was asked to the Buddha, Buddha remained silent. And he just giggled, and he smiled, and mainly he didn't utter a word. He just remained silent, smiling and giggling, and I think basically what he said is maybe. Right? Does thing exist that way? Maybe. Does thing doesn't exist that way? Maybe. So I think, when Buddha's disciple asked these 14 questions to him, he remained silent, which has actually great meaning behind that. If he has uttered, but if he has answered at that time, then I think the rest of the people actually who believe in Buddha and who follows the Buddha might have a dogmatic view, thinking that, oh, Buddha said this, right? Buddha said, yes, it is, and that is why it should be this way. So it will create a huge dogmatic sort of like a view. And I think when he remains silent, that actually opens up the huge door for our mind to really analyze it and to really discuss it. And actually, I think for the Buddhist, Buddha gave a huge opportunity to discuss. That's why in the monastery, for those 10 years that we are studying in the monastery, how we study is we usually debate. And out of 15 hours, we debate like 10 hours. We debate like 10 hours, and that is how we study. And I think that is my just understanding in a nutshell. And maybe I would say maybe I didn't understand anything about the consciousness and science. Of course, I don't understand science and reincarnation. So, like Buddha said, I will also say maybe. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
Studied how the brain produces consciousness. And I'm probably one of the few scientists in this field who would even consider whether reincarnation is possible. And whether you think that's possible or not, if you're studying consciousness, depends on your approach. So let me begin with this slide that shows a number of different approaches to how the brain produces consciousness. Starting clockwise, over there you see the neuroscientist who's putting a probe in the brain and looking for electrical waves. And then we have roboticists and artificial intelligence experts and artists, physicists, psychiatrists, meditators, philosophers. And I'll try to understand how the brain produces subjective experience, consciousness. Now, in Western philosophy, going back to the Greeks, consciousness is generally considered to be a representation of the world in our brain. And even going back to the Greeks, the word being in pink was used to mean subjective experience. That's a joke, but I'm going to use being throughout the talk to mean that. But the point is that Plotinus, whose idea this was originally, said that the brain produces this representation. So the brain produces consciousness, which is really the first form of materialism. And this has evolved and gotten much more complicated, and computers and artificial intelligence and singularity and all that stuff, basically saying the brain equals mind equals computer, and that matter produces mind. So what we're talking about is how the brain, which is a hunk of pinkish gray meat, matter, produces conscious experience, subjective experience that we all have. So that's the first matter produces mind. Now in Eastern philosophy, consciousness is said to be connected to a deeper reality, and you can see the beings outside of his body in reality itself. And this is more along the lines of Eastern philosophy, perhaps what Rinpoche has been saying. And this is related to the idea of panpsychism, that matter and mind are really the same thing, that everything has some form of consciousness in it, that a rock is conscious in a rock-like way, a brain is conscious in a brain-like way. I don't particularly think that, actually. I think there's something specific that goes on that produces conscious experience. But another view, coming from Aristotle, actually, was that the body projects consciousness out into the world. And this, along with certain Eastern approaches, is idealism. And Rinpoche mentioned the idea that mind produces matter. There may not be any matter out there. And Descartes said, I can only be sure that I am conscious. I could be a brain in a vat. I don't really know what's out there. So this is the idea of idealism. Mind produces matter. Now Descartes made a number of contributions, including the idea that the content of consciousness is like a play on the stage, the Cartesian theater, Dennett called it, where various things go into putting on the play, and then it's projected to the audience. But of course, who's the audience? Who's the observer? That's the problem. But it was a good contribution about this Cartesian theater idea. Now, as far as the observer, Descartes believed an immaterial soul perceived the world in his head, in our head, in his head. You can see the soul floating above, and supposedly it entered through the pineal gland, and it was the soul that had the being experience, according to Descartes. And of course, this is Cartesian dualism, that mind and matter are separate and irreconcilable, and maybe it would take 100 lifetimes or 1 billion lifetimes, as Rinpoche said, to understand it. Now, going back to the Cartesian theater idea, computer people, like in the 70s, Simon and Newell, among others, developed architectures based on the Cartesian theater idea, calling it the global workspace. And this was picked up by neuroscientists who applied it to the brain. And the idea is that in the brain, we have sensory inputs coming in to the thalamus and broadcast to the cortex, back and forth to the cortex, back to the thalamus. And these parts of the brain are like the Cartesian theater, and everything that happens in there is the content of consciousness. But again, begging the question of who the observer and why there is conscious experience. But this is all hierarchical based on sensory input. In the last few years, it's been realized that in addition to this, there are internally generated conscious states. These can occur